welcome to this special edition of Catholic Current. From Washington, D.C., I'm Maura Moser. As the nation marks its 250th year, we are discussing and celebrating the contributions of Catholics to this nation. Today, we're speaking with Dr. Shannen Dee Williams, a professor at the University of Dayton and historian of the African American experience. Dr. Williams, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us. As you know, we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and we're talking on this show about the place of Catholics in American history. I know you, in your research, have sought to uncover parts of our history, our American and Catholic history, that have often been hidden. What are some of these stories about the American Catholic experience that are largely unknown and yet essential to our history?
Thank you so much for having me. As this nation celebrates its 250th anniversary, critical historical consciousness reminds us that so much of early American history takes place within Catholic boundaries. Our nation's oldest city is St. Augustine in Florida, where, among many things, the first Christian marriage takes place. This is a marriage between a woman named Luisa de Abrega, who is a free woman of African descent from Seville, Spain, and a Spanish blacksmith and soldier named Miguel Rodriguez. That story reminds us that the African foundations of the nation and of the American Catholic Church are just as old as its Spanish and Portuguese foundations, and indeed much older than many of the other sort of European foundations of American Catholicism. It also reminds us that Catholicism is the first Black articulation of Christianity in the land area that we now call the United States. So it's an important reminder that in the Americas, including in the United States, that Black history is and always has been Catholic history, which reminds us, too, that our nation's history has always been rich with its diversity, whether it is racial diversity or ethnic diversity.
Yeah, what an important reminder, especially as we're talking about the 250th anniversary, to talk about those roots and how Catholicism kind of came to this country. One person you've done a lot of research on is Marie Becraft, and I know she's tied to America's founding English Catholic families. Could you tell us a little bit about her and her life and why it matters today?
Absolutely. Marie Becraft is one of my favorite people from American Catholic history. She is someone who I say that every Catholic and certainly every American should know. She is an early sister in the United States. She is an early member of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, which is one of the nation's oldest Catholic sisterhoods to be founded here on our land, but also the first Catholic sisterhood in the modern church and in the modern world to be free from admissions barriers based on race. They are a community founded for specifically women of African descent who could not go into other communities solely on the basis of race, but who nonetheless never sort of had those barriers in their own lives. In their own sort of story in their own institutions. Mm-hmm. And so what's really remarkable about Marie Becraft, like so many early American Catholic sisters and early American sisters of African descent, is that they can trace their lineage not only to the early African descended families, but also to many of the early European Catholic families. In the case of Marie Becraft, we know that she is the paternal granddaughter of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, who is a member of one of the founding Carroll families in the Maryland colony. Charles Carroll of Carrollton is also the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, who was cousin to Bishop John Carroll, who was the nation's first Catholic bishop and an early benefactor of the church. And so what's remarkable, I think, about Marie Becraft, who when she was just 15 years old, founded the first Catholic school freely open to African-descended women and girls in Washington, D.C., is that, in fact, she is the only Catholic sisterhood who we have on the record who has a literal blood right to the nation through the Carroll family. She literally has that. And so it's a reminder again from the very beginning that Black history is Catholic history. And so many early African-American Catholics can trace their lineage to the earliest European Catholic families as well. And that forces us to sort of grapple with, what we consider to see sort of this complex reality of what it is meant to be an American, and how that is also sort of intertwined with sort of the histories of slavery as well as the histories of freedom.
Now, how did you come to get to know her story?
So I knew it because I was doing work with the Oblate Sisters of Providence. Mm-hmm. Their St. Francis Academy remains the oldest Catholic school, one of the oldest Catholic schools in the United States and the oldest Black Catholic school in the United States. And so when you look at the early... And that's in Baltimore, Maryland, right? So founded in 1828, again, one of the oldest. They are the fourth oldest. The sisters are the fourth oldest community in the diocese, now Archdiocese of Baltimore, and the oldest in the Americas that are freely open to African descended women and girls. And what's remarkable is that many of the parents who are sending their children to be educated by the Oblate Sisters of Providence, they're free descended African descended families, but also remember that the sisters will educate anyone. So they are educating free people, they are educating enslaved people, they are opening their door to European. Sort of, we know that early immigrant families, European immigrant families, are also entrusting these sisters with the education of their children. And so Anne Marie Becraft is someone who comes to us because she was known in Washington, D.C. There's an early sort of report, the first national report on education in the United States mentions her by name, mentions her by school, tells us her family's history, how she was known for her impeccable beauty, her piety, her intelligence. We also know that she assisted the Visitation Sisters. Her school was located directly across the street from the Visitation convent school and right around the corner from the Jesuits. We know that her name appears in the Jesuit records. So there is a very long and I think sort of an important archival imprint and record for her as being a pioneering educator in the Georgetown community of Washington, D.C. But obviously her name has come back to us in recent years, also as a part of Georgetown University's ongoing efforts to make reparation for its slaveholding past. And so they actually renamed one of their buildings after her as a way to sort of honor her presence in the early church, but also her faithfulness really in the face of unholy discrimination. And so I know about her just because of my own research on the Oblate Sisters of Providence and the early history of Catholic education, which she is very much a part of, but also because of this ongoing effort to reckon with the histories of slavery within the church. And in particular, I think which is really remarkable about her story, her parents are actually buried at Holyrood Cemetery on Georgetown's campus because her parents were a very notable, prominent Black Catholics. They attended Holy Trinity Church, but even more so than that, the students themselves actually didn't sort of know her background as they were sort of working to help the university begin to sort of reckon with this history. They went into the archives looking for an example of a Catholic who epitomized the true ideals of Catholicism, right? Sort of having an understanding of the faithfulness that is free from these barriers around race, around sex. And they found the name of Anne Marie Becraft. They did not know at the time that she had become an Oblate Sister of Providence, died as Sister Mary Aloysius, but even more so than that, they were unaware at the time of her connection to the Carroll family. So in many ways, we can also think about this as providential serendipity, right? That there's a way in which this history comes back to us as we attempt to sort of find ways to make reparation, but ultimately also honor our greatest sacrament of reconciliation. And I think her story allows us to do that.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love how you put that. And I think it's important to remember too, and not for you, but for our viewers and listeners, that the Oblate Sisters of Providence continue to do that good work. And of course, there is a cause for canonization for the foundress.
Yes, so for Mother Mary Lange, who is the chief architect and foundress of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, she is one of 7 African-American Catholics on the road to sainthood. 3 of which are sisters, 4 of which are women, but 3 in the case of Mother Mary Lange, who is the foundress of the Oblate Sisters of Providence, which is founded in Baltimore, Maryland in 1828-29. And then Venerable Henriette DeLille, and her cause has advanced to Venerable, so she's Venerable Mary Lange. Venerable Henriette DeLille, who is the foundress of the second successful community freely open to women and girls of African descent, the Sisters of the Holy Family, established in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1842. Their St. Mary's Academy is the second oldest Black Catholic school in the nation, still doing incredible work. They are also, I just want to mention, the first community to be founded in the state of Louisiana, and also they are responsible for founding the first Catholic nursing home in the nation.
Wow. And
then the third African-American sister on the road to canonization is Servant of God, Sister Thea Bowman, who was a pioneer African-American Franciscan sister of perpetual adoration, but a child of the American South, who integrated her community, went on to earn her Ph.D. in English from the Catholic University of America, sort of one of the great sort of champions of recognizing and honoring the gifts that all people bring to the church.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. I know you've already mentioned so many wonderful contributions of Black Catholic women in the United States, but I wonder, are there any other kind of contributions you want to highlight while we're having this discussion?
There's so many stories, and that I know
I
so
know.
many, so I can't go through all of them. But what I will say is that if you go into the records, what you will find is that Black Catholic women, whether they entered religious life or not, are among the pioneering religious leaders of our nation. They are pioneering women religious, they are pioneering educators, they are pioneering school leaders, healthcare practitioners. These are women who march for voting rights, they march for civil rights, they are pioneering theologians. But these are also women who I just really want to underscore forged a tradition of Catholicism free from the sins of racism, free from the sins of discrimination. These are women who nurtured vocations of men and women to religious life. There are sometimes women who had to hide, unfortunately, because of unholy discrimination in the church, and had to hide parts of their identity, even as they forged and nurtured this tradition of Catholicism. And I say, so although I'm not going to name all these names, I do want to mention one in particular as we sort of think about these women who sometimes had to hide, but nonetheless brought sort of this great tradition out of the cradles of American Catholicism, among them Maryland, but also Louisiana. And so I'll say the name of Mildred Agnes Martinez Prevost, who quite literally has nurtured the vocation of the
That
first
sounds
pope to
familiar.
arise the first pope to arise from the United States, our current pope, Pope Leo the 14th. Remember that his maternal roots are in the Catholic Church in Louisiana. And what we know is that by the turn of the 19th century, the church in Louisiana, the Catholic Church in Louisiana, is dominated in terms of the baptismal ranks everywhere by women of African descent. And so it is these women who will give rise to a lineage that will lead us to our current pope. And so, again, I think that story is really important because it reminds us, again, not only that Black history is and always has been Catholic history, but that we can no longer allow for anyone to say that the Black experience has been negligent or insignificant to our understanding of the American Catholic experience. From the foundations, it's there. Again, it is a Black woman that launches a sort of Christian marriage in the United States. And indeed, it is a faithful Black Catholic woman, a woman of African descent, who will give us and nurture the vocation that will give us the first pope from the United States. And what I hope that these stories remind us is that that was inevitable if we actually understand the faithfulness of this very, very important sorority of Black Christian women.
Mm-hmm. And it continues to this day, right? We're not done yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We're often aware of ways that Catholics faced anti-Catholicism in the United States. How was that hostility compounded by racism for Black Catholics? And what are some of the ways that they responded? You've already given so many wonderful examples of how they have persevered despite what you have called unholy racism in the church. But how
Yes,
is that
one
shaped?
thing that always sort of stuck out to me when I was in the archive was how people who promoted racial segregation and exclusion often sort of targeted the Catholic Church because of its social teachings. The most radical and also our most fundamental social teaching is that we as Catholics believe and recognize and affirm the life and dignity of every person. Mm. And that made the Catholic Church a target of groups that were committed to racial exclusion. So just as African Americans, for example, were targeted by the Klan, so were Catholics. And so in places like the South, what's really remarkable is that you oftentimes see sort of targets on Black Catholics, not only because they're African American, but also because they are Catholic, because they believe that Catholic social teaching preach social equality, which in itself is an affront to sort of the system of Jim Crow apartheid. And so what you oftentimes, and certainly what we've forgotten, is that Catholic schools in the South, whether they were run, or Black Catholic schools in the South, whether they were run by Black sisters or white sisters or white priests, were targets of racial terrorism by the Klan. They were subjected to arson, in part because these were sometimes the only integrated spaces in communities, right? Where you may have an entire sort of African American student population, but the sisters and the priest are white. Or even if there are African American sisters, there's generally going to be a white priest that is assigned to that, which is violating racial segregation. And so what I would say is that obviously the anti-Catholicism would compound the discrimination that Black Catholics would face. And oftentimes they also had to sort of navigate this in really sort of remarkable ways and strategic ways. But nonetheless, it's a reminder, particularly of the really sort of powerful realities of Catholic social teaching, right? That again, our most fundamental, but also I would argue very radical sort of social teaching is that we recognize and affirm the life and dignity of every person. Obviously, this is why so many Black people or people of African descent have been called to the Catholic Church because of our Catholic social teaching. But also a reminder too that even in Catholic spaces where that wasn't always sort of lived out in the ways in which it was, we always had Black Catholics who were not only trying to make their nation truly democratic, but also really trying to make their church truly Catholic. And so some of these examples that we can find in our history of where the church is really at the forefront of sort of challenging the status quo, it's oftentimes the result of Black Catholics really sort of calling upon their own beloved church to be truly Catholic, which obviously would get the church into some trouble for those who did not necessarily agree with the teachings of the church. But nonetheless, I think it's an important story. It's a complex story, and sometimes it's very complicated. But it's also a story that I think is rich with tradition, rich with faith, and I think rich with an understanding of what it is meant to be an American Catholic, and especially in the United States, certainly if we begin to sort of tell the stories of all Catholics, and especially that of Black Catholic women and girls.
Yes, it is, as you say, very rich, complicated, but beautiful story, and one that we hope that people who are watching and listening today will want to learn more about. Dr. Williams, is there anything you would like to say before we conclude?
I just want to say, as we celebrate this 250th anniversary of the nation's founding, I want to encourage everyone to learn the stories of Catholics like Marie Becraft, who died as Oblate Sister of Providence, Mary Aloysius Becraft, to encourage people to sort of look up the stories of our history, look at this rich tradition that has left a blueprint for us as we face challenging times, but also look to this history as a reminder of sort of the power and the beauty and the saving grace, right, of our Catholic faith.
Great. Thank you once again, Dr. Williams. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this special edition of Catholic Current. You can find out more about our ongoing celebration of America at 250 by visiting us online at usccb.org or follow us on social media at USCCB. I'm Maura Moser. See you next time.